Thank you so much for listening to Urbanistica Podcast. I am Mustafa Sharif, an urban planner, and you're more than welcome to join my big journey of exploring the making of smarter and more livable cities. Please don't forget to follow Urbanistica on the different social media platforms, and also let's connect on LinkedIn. Big thanks to Urbanistica podcast partner AFRY. AFRY is an international engineering and design company providing sustainable solutions in the fields of energy, industry, and infrastructure. Are you ready for a new episode? Let's go for it. Today we have a new story and we have a fantastic storyteller. It's a big pleasure for me to welcome you, Steve, to Urbanistica Podcast. Hello and welcome.
Big pleasure for me to be here.
How are you?
I'm doing well.
Yeah?
I'm doing well today.
Yeah?
Weather is showing signs of spring in New York, and that's always a good sign for when the life comes back to public spaces.
Yeah. It's actually sad here because in Stockholm, spring is not coming. It's snowing outside here. So, I want more like inspiration and sun from you.
Right. Well, when it comes, it'll be. The Swedes are great for basking in the sun and in their public spaces in the summer. They make maximum utilization of their spaces when they can.
Yeah. So in this episode, I love to hear more like stories. You take us back in time. You reflect about PPS, placemaking, and projects you do. I hope you are ready.
I am ready.
Yeah. So, Steve, take us back in time.
You can say that PPS has been a startup for 50 years. We're always starting up something new. So,
Yeah.
I was honored to be included as a co-founder, and looking back at some of the materials that were put out in 1975 is really interesting in today's context. I resurrected last week a document called the PPS Prospectus, which was written in February 1975.
Wow.
About what this organization was going to be like and what the issues were going to be. And it was remarkably prescient. It hit on, the idea of that streets were being designed for pedestrians and not for vehicles at the expense of pedestrians, how designers were not taking into consideration human use and behavior. And of course, PPS came out of the work of William H. Holly White, who was our mentor, and we were set up to sort of apply his techniques. But in the early days, it was really in addition to trying to figure out how to keep the lights on in the office, we faced a real challenge in trying to convince people to hire us. We early on found it very hard to raise foundation monies for public spaces, and to some extent that's still true today, although it's much better. But we did find people that were willing to hire us to fix a public space that they had or to study a particular issue. And so that's how we sort of grew the organization initially. But you had to convince them that public spaces was an issue and that we could solve their problem. So it was like a two-step process.
Yeah.
But the good news is in the early days, we found a number of advocates and early adopters that really understood what we do. And, they're still our friends like 6 years later. So
Yeah.
we're very grateful to those people that took a risk in us in the early days.
And now after, say, 50 years, do you still face the same challenge when it comes to the topic that making cities for people, that you need to explain why and argue for it, or no?
Yes, unfortunately, I think the challenges remain the same, but we've made a lot of progress in 50 years.
Yeah.
50 years ago, there were very few pedestrian advocates advocating for people, and we had this concept called Streets for All Users that we developed in the 1980s, and the idea that a street was not just for the cars, it was for the buses and the bicycles. pedestrians and everyone using the street. And they had to balance the use of the street to accommodate all the users. And usually that meant, trying to change the way car traffic was handled. But that was a pretty radical concept at that time, although it seems like such common sense now. But today, I think that kind of a concept is more in the mainstream
Yeah.
than it certainly used to be.
Mm-hmm. And like, how has the PPS changed over the decades? You follow the
Oh
journey.
my, yeah, yeah, that's really a good question. Uh, we uh, went through the different chapters, I guess is the best way to describe it. In the
Yeah.
early days, we were kind of this like think and do tank. And, we would research a problem and solve the problem. And
Mm.
we tried to convince our client that we had studied it. We used, different techniques like time-lapse photography and systematic behavioral observations. These are techniques that Polly White had developed. And we would become very knowledgeable about
Mm.
how a space actually functioned.
Yeah.
And then we were able to like convince, the client that we knew enough about the space to make some recommendations. And
Mm.
uh, as we developed, we became more participatory. We started doing surveys for
Mm.
public spaces. We started hosting workshops and developing tools that enabled community to see the space through our eyes as if it was through ours, with looking at the same issues. And we found out that that was a lot more efficient, and also got people much more engaged and interested in implementing the projects. The other thing that changed is we like the types of spaces. In the 80s, we were, for a while, we were doing all this work at airports. And you think, oh my God, what is, it was kind of crazy to fly to a city, study the airport, get back on the plane, and never leave the airport. But, we were looking at how people were using airports,
Okay.
and how they were circulating, and signage and information, where they're getting lost, but mostly was the waiting areas. And
Mm.
waiting areas at those times were like long rows of seats. And we pioneered the concept of waiting areas as public spaces
Okay.
with food and different kinds of seating and a more relaxed atmosphere and not quite so regimented.
Mm.
Um, we pretty much gave that up because it was, not the most interesting work, but the legacy is you can see in airports all over the world now a whole different way that people view airports.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so we took on different topics. We took on transportation, we took on parks,
Mm.
took on markets, and over the course of 50 years, these emphases have ebbed and flowed, but uh, one of the strengths of PPS is that it has never stayed like content with what it had. We were always
Mm. Yeah.
very forward thinking, and I think that is true today as well.
Yeah. And did you imagine or dream about like this will be so international and will be a movement and people from every country is checking what your projects and so on, or no?
Never, never,
No.
never, never any of that expectation. I think we realized in the 1990s that we were kind of onto something that was big,
Okay.
and the internet started. We developed our first website, we developed our
Yeah.
first online newsletter, and people started contacting us from all over the world.
Yeah.
And I recall doing, I'm not sure what year this was, mid 90s, a strategic plan
Mhm.
facilitated by one of our board members. And we decided our vision, not our mission, but the vision of the organization was to achieve international recognition by, I think, 2000 or 2002, something like that.
Okay.
And it was miraculous that that actually happened, which you can measure just by like where
Yeah.
people were contacting us from all over the world, and we were beginning to host training programs and
Mm.
conferences, and people were coming from like 20 different countries.
Wow.
Um, but in 2013, uh, we decided to host what we were calling then the Placemaking Leadership Council.
Yeah.
And I organized that event. It was in Detroit.
Mm.
And we talked about like how many people are going to come to this event. And well, we said, well, about 75, we thought.
Okay.
So I rent a venue for 75 people,
Yeah.
And that many people registered on the first day of the registration. So, and then, it was sort of this like conference organizer's nightmare.
Yeah.
We ended up in the largest, event space in Detroit in the big hotel downtown that had a capacity of 450 in the ballroom, which is we were at capacity, we were standing room
Wow.
only at that conference.
It's crazy.
And there was a big contingent of Detroit, but that also had people from, all over the world.
Yeah.
And we were did in Detroit because Detroit is one of the places where we were able to illustrate the impact and in
Mm.
how a transformative public space can impact a city economically, socially, and really be a one reason for the rebirth of the city. So we were celebrating it.
Yeah.
And then in 2018, Fred Ken, Kathy Madden, my other co-founders, and I, we left PPS
Mm.
and created this fund called the Placemaking Fund. And we have two programs,
Yeah.
Placemaking X and the Social Life Projects. And we took on Placemaking X is in some ways like a spin-off from PPS because it took this idea of growing networks of placemakers around the world. And Ethan Kettis, of course, directs that now.
Yeah.
And there are um, placemaking networks, really
Mm.
20, I lost count, like 30 around the world. It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And um, so that was launched in 2020, like a month before the shutdown of the pandemic,
Yes.
yeah, which is also not a very good timing
No.
in Abu Dhabi at World Urban Forum.
Mm.
And since then, we're at kind of our 5th-year milestone on Placemaking X. It's a way for Fred and Kathy and I to continue to have an impact, to continue to grow the field, to continue to be thought leaders,
Mm.
continue to invest in future of placemaking through both Placemaking X, the Social Life Project. It's wonderful articles that Fred and Kathy put
Yeah.
together on all different kinds of successful public spaces. Really encourage people to sign up for that, sociallifeproject.org. And um, so we're right at a point, there's a summit in Toronto is coming
Yeah.
June.
Yes.
It's kind of a pivotal moment for us to kind of determine what the future of the placemaking movement is. But we answer your question, it was not, we didn't start out to create a global movement. It just kind of
Yeah.
happened that way.
And Steve, you mentioned the leadership, because all placemakers are also leaders in different ways. I want to ask you, like, through these years and experience, what are the essential leadership skills that we need to have in order to drive more like impactful placemaking?
Well, three skills. I think collaboration is one of the most important ones, and the ability to convene people and work in a group, both collaborate with people that you're working with to improve a space, but also collaborate with the community. It's placemaking is a kind of facilitated process. It's not a professional process that you do to a community. Like designers design things for communities. Placemakers organize
Mm.
communities to create placement. So that's one skill. I think maybe patience is another one. Because uh to really have an impact, these projects can take a long time. There are ways, of course, you can jumpstart
Yeah.
projects with what we call lighter, quicker, cheaper. You can do it
Mm.
in a couple weeks. But the big ones, the bigger impact, like Campus Martius in downtown Detroit,
Yeah.
you know, multi-million project is evolved over 20 years, massive investment of funds, but a big impact. But you're gonna have to be patient to go through that. And the third one, I think, is just the vision and keep that ability to have a vision and stick to it.
Yeah. Yeah. So these, like, if I have these skills, I will be able to run placemaking project.
or at least start with?
Well, I think if you have s- these skills are kind of a basis for it. I teach at Pratt
Yeah.
Institute, and there's a graduate program in urban placemaking and management. It's the only graduate program in placemaking in the United States, maybe the world.
Yeah.
And it's really a great program. I encourage people to look at it. It kind of jump starts your ability to do placemaking. Um, I wish in my early days someone had sat me down for a semester and said, "Here are all the things you need to know how to do."
Yeah.
We kind of, taught ourselves
Mm.
and um, kept improving how we work with communities and the different techniques for the workshops changing as we went along. But now there's a body of knowledge about like how you do these things, and it's good to be able to cover that in a kind of course.
Mm, mm, mm. And so I ask you about people and leadership. Let's go back to public spaces. Um, through the years, what criteria you found that you can measure a successful public space?
Well, I think it's all in this diagram, the place diagram,
Yeah,
and that's an interesting story about how we
yeah,
developed the
exactly.
place diagram. Would you like to hear that
Of
story?
course,
Because
yeah.
it's like
This is my
that
point. I wanted
diagram is
the.
like everywhere, and it didn't just like leap into the internet.
So tell us the
uh,
story behind the scene.
so so um, I was leading a research project on the role of transit in creating livable metropolitan communities.
Mm.
It was a government um, funded program back when the U.S. government was investing in things like this.
Back in the days.
And uh, as part of the research, we had a whole like committee that were leading, and evaluating us. And the first task was to define livability.
Mm.
And that's pretty hard actually.
Yeah,
But you look at the literature, there's all sorts of lists like magazines like the 10 most livable cities in
yeah.
Sweden. And it's based on like quality of schools or
He-
housing prices, whatever.
Healthcare and so on.
But we stumbled onto this literature about livable places,
Mm.
which really resonated with us, and the idea that could have a place-based approach to livability that would enable you to both have some sort of intervention in a public space that you could actually evaluate the impact of. So I remember I sat down in the conference room with Fred and Kathy, and I said, "Well, we have to define what a great place is." We wrote on pivot, "What is a great place?" at the top of the page. And I don't know how we ended up with a circle, but we kind of created this circle with these
Yeah.
these different four attributes with
Mm.
the axis and linkages, sociability, uses and activities, comfort and image.
Mm.
And then we started like, what are those different? And this brutal place diagram sat in a kind of on a tattered flip chart paper for like years at the conference room. I'm sorry it disappeared. Um,
Yeah.
but that was the sort of basis uh, of our uh, looking at how you have an impact and how you evaluate impact of place, because you can um, measure like access to linkages. You can measure like the number of
Mm.
people, I mean, circulating through space. You can measure safety. You can measure comfort. You can look at social behavior and how much social behavior before and after a intervention. So it is possible to have these uh, public space interventions and understand how they're actually working. I think it's really important to do that. More of that should be done to document the impacts that these placemaking changes are having all over the world.
Yeah. And Steve, in some project, there is not a big budget to analyze all these different aspects and do like walk through the entire process and methodology. What what is your advice to us in case we don't have this budget that allows us to explore all of the different aspects? What can we do? Because sometimes it's a kind of like with the time pressure and budget, it's impossible to follow the diagram or the methodology from A to Z.
I don't think it's a methodology that you cannot alter or change. I think it's a guide.
Mm.
There are certain things you should be doing. You should be thinking about in thinking in a holistic way about how to improve a space. Don't just think about how to make it more beautiful or how to make it more accessible. You need to think about all the different aspects of the space, and you need to talk to other people about it. And you need to trust your own abilities to, go in and make some intervention and, get permission, hopefully if you can, to put benches in. There are so many things that are simple, low cost things you could do.
Yeah.
So you don't have to follow um a tried and true path, but generally I think it's a good guideline.
Mm-hmm. And about placemaking, you mentioned that there will be like a conference, and together with a community and leaders, you will like define or explore what's the next step. I love to hear your perspective. Like, what are trends you see shaping the next, let's say, generation of placemaking or public spaces?
I think that need some notes on that here.
Yeah, that's good.
uh, um, I think that it's the globalization of placemaking is what excites me the most.
Mm.
For years we just worked in the United States, and then we had the opportunity to work in Australia, Czech
Yeah,
Republic, and other countries around the world. But that was us going to there and doing projects with the local people. But to have these self-initiated networks uh, almost spontaneously appear, uh, not quite, but we nurture some of them along. Ethan nurtures them along, but to have people around the world that are now focused on that's a very exciting trend. And I go to these conferences, like when in Rotterdam, and I'm
yeah,
sitting in these sessions about this placemaking, that placemaking, and it's very um, gratifying to hear people talk in a very serious way about issues that we were trying to figure out in 1975 and didn't really have it all figured out.
no,
And not that they have it all figured out today, but to have
yeah,
um, thousands of people thinking about these issues is better than a handful of people in Rockefeller Center in, in New York City.
yeah, yeah. Do you see that, like with the public spaces, there will be like more technology involved, or how do you imagine the next generation of public spaces? Or no, they will stay as how we know them: benches, trees, and power of 10, maybe.
I don't see any radical
Mm.
changes in public spaces. They're probably white, so um, eloquently defined that they're made of a set of basics, and they do seem to be cross cultural. When you go into a different country, and I've done workshops in India
Mm.
and various other cultures around the world, and but people they want benches, they want the same things.
Yeah.
um they think that the internet is a powerful tool to
Mm.
mobilize people and to get ideas,
Mm.
and the idea of digital placemaking uh is you can create a place online, but it is a virtual place. It's not a physical place. I
Mm.
don't think it replaces a physical place. I think it's like the difference between Zoom meetings and in-person meetings.
Yeah.
You can have them, but they somehow lack the personal connection. And it's these when you convene at a place, that's when you really start making social connections.
Yeah. So with all new technologies, you don't see that it will be our need will be less and less for being outdoor in public spaces, but instead we can be in our like these digital glasses and all other devices.
I think that's a threat, actually, not a trend.
Mm.
I've if we do need to counter that effect. We need to make spaces so that people want to go to them
Mm.
and put them in places um, where you can interact with in person with your friends and neighbors. There's been some interesting research done about people in public spaces that are on their phones,
Mm.
and the research has found that most of those people are engaged in social activities.
Okay.
They're texting their friends,
Yeah.
they're looking at their social Facebook pages. They're not like writing reports.
No.
And so it's just the curious function of the curious layering in of this function into a real public space so that it takes the socializing, way beyond people actually sitting on the same bench.
Yeah. Interesting. Steve, do you still work like with a project related to public places or no?
Yeah, I'm not physically in an office anymore, which is wonderful. I don't miss running an organization at all. Um, but I helped launch a public markets program at PPS
Yeah.
in the 1987.
Mm.
Um, and that has really grown in the last 10 years. We had a International Public Markets Conference in Barcelona in 2015, 10 years ago. And that was really the launch of something we call market cities, which is looking at, which is a whole other conversation for another day. We probably should talk about that. Be
Yes, I
interesting
love
for
to.
you. Um, and we always understood the power of the market as a social place, an economic engine,
Yeah.
as a force beyond just a place to buy things.
Mm.
What Market Cities does is look holistically at all of the markets in a city or region and what could they do collaboratively to have a bigger impact on inclusive economic development or climate resilience or health and well-being if they work together, and that city policymakers understood that markets have these greater
Mm.
benefits. Most markets operate under kind of the radar screen of city policymakers, and this is something we're trying to change. So I'm very involved with that. And of course, the Placemaking X, the social project.
Yeah.
I hope to be going to Vietnam again later this year. I've been started working in Hanoi with the markets in Hanoi in 2018, and we were successful in getting advocating for a new national policy
Mm.
that's much more supportive of markets in the country, which is very much in need of renovation. And
Yeah.
something I've been working with on a Canadian foundation called HealthBridge, office in Hanoi, really great group of
Mm.
people that have really had an impact. The new legislation calls for cities and regions to develop city development,
Yeah.
market development plans. So most of the cities and regions don't even know what that is, and we're going to have to figure it out. So I'm enjoying working on
So
projects like that.
you're still active.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't play golf after. Like,
No, I play the cello.
so you still have like now you have like more maybe spare time and do hobbies or no? Projects are
Yeah,
taking most of your time.
what's kind of interesting, and like when was back in a leadership role,
Yeah.
PPS, when I was running the organization, 80% of my time had nothing to do with the work.
Okay.
Of and well, it was, enable the work to happen, but it was like personnel,
Yeah.
fundraising,
Yeah, exactly. Administration.
proposals, meetings, and board meetings. And when I was liberated from that, it's like, wow, I have like the 20% of my time I can devote to, what I like to do.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and it's this kind of a passion that I have that I can keep doing
Yeah. Yeah. If you
for a
go
long
back,
time, I hope.
yeah. If you go back in time and you can redo something that you did, I don't know, maybe project, maybe something related to career or something else. what will you do in a different way?
That's a very good. Uh, I um, we had some course corrections that um that were necessary because we were going in a direction that didn't seem to be productive. And remember in the 1980s, we were becoming more and more like just an urban planning firm. We were doing like urban planning for projects, downtown plans, and that kind
Mm.
of thing. And we did a very good job, but we had to focus, of course, on the public
Yeah.
spaces. But uh, I don't think we were having the impact that we had later when we shifted more into kind of a
Yeah.
participatory approach. And uh, PPS was always very agile, and we had to be because you would be there was a big recession in the early '90s, and suddenly we had to like cut staff and finances were tight, so we reinvented ourselves. Um, and we reinvented ourselves as the people that can bring you projects at low cost and don't cost a lot of money. You can do right away.
Yeah.
And cities were short on resources at that time. And they said, "Yeah, that's great. Let's do it." So um, we were very good at finding the right niche at the right time.
Mm. Mm. Because a lot of organizations also want to do a similar journey like PPS and be successful and work internationally and so on. So I want also like to get this kind of recipe. What made PPS growing so global and being so impactful? So being agile is one. They have more.
Agile, opportunistic. When you
Mm.
see an opportunity, I mean, I think the Fred, Kathy, and I had a real nice mix of skills.
Mm.
And Fred was more of the charismatic guy out there making speeches.
Yeah.
I was sort of, writing reports and organizing things and managing things, and Kathy was leading education efforts, and it was
Yeah.
very compatible. Like,
Mm.
I don't, and today, after going through a period of having just one executive director,
Yeah.
EPS went back to that model. They have co-executive
Mm.
directors, Nate Storing and Kelly Vero,
Yeah.
and it's an interesting way to um, build capacity, make up for like I knew that I couldn't do everything,
Mm.
and but as a team we could,
Yeah.
and it filtered down through. We had a tremendous staff and people at EPS. Um, we had, we probably had 1,000 interns come and go through the organization,
Wow.
and all the different people that worked at PPS and went on to other things.
Yeah.
It was it's very inspiring to see, what happened with the offsprings of PPS as well.
Mm. More ingredients in this recipe.
Um, uh, Patience. It's a uh, doesn't always what's the expression? I'm blanking on that right now. There's an expression that I
Yeah.
uh, when you think it can't be done,
Mm.
it doesn't always work out that way.
Mm.
Having having that attitude, um, and is is very important in finding ways to achieve impact
Yeah.
when you're told that you can't do something.
So interesting. And you told me that you are having like a session with the PPS, like doing some short movie about the history. You and friend and Kathy. Or
Yes. So yes, Fred and Kathy and I are being filmed by PPS in a few
nice.
weeks.
Yeah.
The actual 50th anniversary was on March 6th.
Yeah.
um, And we wanted to kind of celebrate that moment, but we couldn't schedule it for the exact date. So we're doing it a little bit later.
Yeah. Yeah. It will be very interesting and inspiring to hear it as well.
There's also a wonderful film about Fred that Kathy and
Yeah.
I made brief appearances in is called The Placeman.
Yeah.
You've probably seen it. And
That's
um,
amazing.
that sort of captures a lot
Mm.
of the spirit that we've had over the
Yeah.
years.
Yeah. I love it. We
And
we 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 translate it to Arabic and Swedish and many languages as well.
now,
Uh,
now I'm enormously proud to have worked with friend Kathy all these years, and the fact that we're still working together
yeah.
is somewhat of a miracle. That's, people can work together for almost 50 years and still um, communicate.
Yeah. It's a great story to tell. A lot to learn from it as well. And in the last section of this episode is more about like you give advice to different groups. And first, I love to get your advice to students listening to you. We have a lot of students listening to the podcast from different countries, working in different fields relating to cities and design. So, what is your advice to them?
Well, I think maybe two things. One is to uh, learn outside your field.
Hmm.
And, if you're an architecture program, take classes in sociology.
Hmm.
If you're in landscape architecture, look at other design programs or ways of um, looking at urban economics and think beyond your discipline is
Hmm.
one thing to do. There are certain skills that you can learn as a placemaker. We teach those at Pratt. I can give a plug for the Pratt program. It's a good program. Uh, but you can also, uh, most universities offer, classes in community engagement in some ways
Yeah.
or public participation. Think beyond your program because the programs are very discipline based
Hmm.
generally,
Hmm.
and placemaking is much more holistic.
True. Okay, so this was for students, and an advice to now. You know this as well. A lot of cities starting their placemaking networks or countries starting placemaking networks. What is your advice to newly started placemaking networks?
Oh, I don't know. They're so different. There's some of the networks are quite established. The European Placemaking Network is super
Mm,
organized and has the wonderful conference, and other groups are much more um, emerging.
mm,
I I think some of the things that Placemaking Europe is doing uh, is relevant to other regions where, for example, working strategically with cities within your network to offer the skills of placemaking to rethink and retrain city staff and city leadership. That's something we're looking to do with Placemaking X as well to try to go in and help restructure way city agencies think of each other as more holistic and less focused on their own particular silos, whether it's planning or health. Or,
mm.
placemaking is one way to kind of bring it together. So and I also think that having action and not just talking about placemaking, doing things,
Mm.
encouraging cities to implement projects, that's a that's an important skill to begin to develop. And you start doing that, then you can begin to take on bigger and bigger challenges with larger scale
Yeah.
projects and programs. So you could start with a street corner, but you could end up, affecting a new urban park in a city, for example.
Mm, mm. So engage with the cities or share the knowledge and also do projects and not only like talk about it and make theories and so on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good summary.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Steve. It was like how to say good good to talk about or to get like just a glimpse about history and some of reflections, and hopefully we will do like an episode with focus on the markets projects and program that you do. And yeah, how are you going to celebrate the 50 years?
It's already passed. We had a toast over the phone. So,
A digital
but yeah, I'm very upbeat and optimistic about the future of placemaking.
yeah.
It's come a long way. I'm honored to have played a role, but really it's, become something much greater than any of us ever imagined. And it's a wonderful thing to see.
Yeah, yeah. Good job. Keep up the good work, Steve.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's been wonderful to talk to you.